Thank you for sharing that, Janet. It's a wonderful example of what men can do. They can behave the way we want our sons to be, in the future, and teach them how to treat others by an example of how we treat others. They're watching. Their eyes are big. They absorb like a sponge. Doug, I find it really interesting that you talk about some of the evangelical churches in America. Is there a possibility that the way things have changed, we talked about this earlier in the show, churches are mirroring culture quite often today? Is this contributing to the decline of manhood and the strength in being what it is to be a man?
I think it definitely is, and again, a lot of that's with very good intentions, but the church, we could look at various aspects of it, but certainly in church leadership, there are cultural pressures for churches to move away from the clear biblical mandate for male headship and male leadership in the church. And the more that leadership shifts to women, the less interested men are in church. And again, as I said earlier, men are there's an inclination to play, and we're happy to get out of our responsibilities. And so as women more aggressively take leadership roles in the church, surprise, surprise, there are fewer men, even in our evangelical churches. We're told, demographers tell us that there's 67% females in the evangelical church, and of course a higher percentage in the liberal church. Men are not going to be there to lead if women are going to take those roles. There are other dimensions. Preaching in the American, broadly evangelical church has become much more relational and kind of self-help oriented, topical oriented, and it shifted away from the solid foundational doctrinal expository preaching through the books of the Bible that was a part of the Protestant Reformation, recovered in the Protestant Reformation, part of the early church, a central part of the early church. Church's worship was the expository preaching. Men actually, that resonates with men. Foundational truths, men sink their teeth into those. They have some place to firmly stand there. And when preaching has become relational self-help talks, men don't gravitate to that as much. So the shift in preaching, I think, and I think, of course, the shift in music, as Mark Driscoll likes to call it, it's become chickified. And, the males aren't drawn to chickified worship. And there's pressure on young men if you're going to be spiritual, you have to emote in worship like women do. And in a sense, that furthers the neutering of our males. That's not male expression of deep, profound feeling. Men express that differently than women. But when women and when feminist agendas are shaping what should be normative in worship, then I think we set our young men up to be very confused, and of course many of them to prefer the football stadium to the church.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, it's making sense, Doug. I'm getting it. Phone lines are still open. We're taking your phone calls, 1-800-571-2755. When we come back, we'll take more calls. Also, I want to find out more about, in one of the books, in Hold Fast, you discuss the importance of learning how to be a good leader. And there's some practical ways that fathers can lead their sons to practice being a good leader. We need to find out what these are. Also, later on, I want to find out what to do if you're in a single-parent situation, nurturing young men, finding mentors. What do we do to make sure that we're raising godly men of integrity for our next generation? This is a huge issue right now. So join us on the phones if you like, 1-800-571-2755, or along the way. Oh, it's mail@alongthewayradio.com. You knew that. Mail@alongthewayradio.com. We'll be right back with Doug Bond.
What do you think? Let us know. Call now, 1-800-571-2755.
It's some kindly of a contest where they see which bunchful of them men can take that pumpkin and run from one end of that cow pasture to the other without either getting knocked down or stepping in something.
Been beat up, been broken down, nowhere but up when you're face down on the ground. I'm in last place, if I place it all, but there's hope for this underdog.
Welcome back to the show. It's Along the Way on the Faith Radio Network. It is 1-800-571-2755. I know you got questions about your sons. How do we deal with our teenage growing sons and turning them into, helping to cultivate them, not turning them into, helping to cultivate strong leaders, strong men, men of integrity, men that can rise to the occasion in the next generation. We're talking with Douglas Bond, and he has written a book series. It's Fathers and Sons. One book is Hold Fast in a Broken World, and the other is Stand Fast in the Way of Truth. We do have a call-in line, but I have to ask you a question, Doug. First, during the break, Carl and I were talking about this whole process of men and then women standing up and taking over a little bit more. Which do you think? It feels like a chicken and the egg scenario here. What happens first? Do men back out and so women have to rise to the occasion and take a stronger leadership role? Or was it that women were pushing their way into stronger, bigger capacities and so men just kind of fell back and did what made them feel more manly, which is go to sports games and hang out with each other?
Well, I would say that the biblical order of responsibility falls back on men. And that's part of training our sons to be men. I mentioned feminism earlier, and clearly there's very traceable trails that are inevitable back to the cultural shift there for our sons. But finally, men were supposed to be in leadership anyway, culturally, in the church, in the home, in society in general, and it's supposed to be, according to the Word of God, it's supposed to be a loving headship. And if that had been in place, feminism would have unmasked itself at the very get-go. So, again, I think one of the most important things is that our young men learn to take responsibility. And so nobody's off the hook by, being able to see some clear cultural markers where feminism stepped in and began really recrafting people's thinking about the roles of men and women. Where were the men then? Why weren't they speaking up? Where were the godly Christian men who were showing loving headship in their homes? Why weren't they standing in the gap then? So I guess chicken or the egg. I'd go back. The men or the chicken. We have responsibility.
Figuratively and literally, perhaps.
I guess it fits, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I was thinking, if I may, we were talking about what about a woman whose husband is, been the chicken. He's out of the picture. He's gone, and he's left her to be the head in her home by default, and alas, that's a tragic reality. And we wish it was only true in the broad culture, but it's true in our churches too, because as you said earlier, Stephanie, obviously the church is not immune to the culture, and I think that's a very important question, and I want to see those are the sons that particularly need rescuing. They don't have a father in their home. They don't have the father figure they've seen in many cases has been all negative. He's shown them the wrong way to go. Yeah. And I think that's where the church is so important as a whole too. The church needs to we need to have more ministry for men, for young men. We need to have the fathers in the church who have sons. They're in their homes. They're practicing loving headship of their wives and families. They need to be incorporating these sons into this kind of mentoring that can happen when they're reading about learning to lead and learning to serve and so forth. They need to be brought into that.